I'm Bill Jasper with Liberty News Network and the New American Magazine. I'm here in Reno, Nevada at LPAC 2011. And I have as a guest now at our booth Donna Holt, who is the President and Executive Director of Campaign for Liberty Virginia.
Yes.
And you came out here to Reno from Virginia, and we're glad to have you here today. And we have her booklet here, The History of Sustainable Development, Connecting the Dots. It's prepared by the Virginia Campaign for Liberty, and it is available at their website, campaignforliberty.com/VA. Donna, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. The Agenda 21 and Sustainable Development are huge issues that we've been covering in the New American for many years, but you've been dealing with it out there in Virginia.
Yes.
Tell us what's happening there.
Well, you know, people are finally catching on. I found back in 2008, when I approached people with Agenda 21, they were put off by it, saw it primarily as conspiracy theory. But then we revisited the issue, and I started giving presentations in April of 2010, and people were more receptive. And more it's gaining momentum with the Tea Party movement. And they are mobilizing locally, and they're having an impact at the local level with local governments. We've had 3 of the 18 localities who are members of ICLEI, and as you know, ICLEI wrote Chapter 28, describing or really outlining how to implement Agenda 21 locally. And they have been effective in pulling 3 of the localities out of membership with ICLEI. And they're still working. We've had many dropping their sustainability plans, redrafting their comprehensive plans to exclude many of the programs.
For the viewers, in a nutshell, what is Agenda 21, and also explain ICLEI?
Well, Agenda 21 was unveiled at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. There were 178 nations who signed on board, and George H.W. Bush was the signatory for the United States. Because it was a soft law, it required no act by Congress, but in 1993, President Bill Clinton, by executive order, established the President's Council on Sustainable Development, and it included a lot of environmental groups as well as federal level cabinet agencies. And they were responsible for translating the recommendations, policy recommendations in Agenda 21 into policy for the United States. ICLEI, of course, has been instrumental in working with local governments. It's the International Council on Environmental Initiatives. Now, of course, they call themselves local governments for sustainability. And they work at the local level with local governments to implement Agenda 21. They're prepared with a boilerplate of solutions.
So, explain, if you could, sustainable development. What's wrong with sustainable development? It sounds like we just want to have sustainable practices so that there will be sufficient natural resources in the future for everybody.
Well, what we're finding, though, is what we all think of, what most reasonable, especially conservatives, think of when they think of sustainable development. They think of something like the continuing success of a business or something of that nature. But what we're finding is the UN program that was adopted by the President's Council on Sustainable Development is more about a redistribution of wealth. It's about government control of really every facet of our life. The economy, they are implementing anti-free market principles using public-private partnerships. There are incentives, subsidies, tax breaks for a chosen few, insider privilege, and the free market is lost amidst those programs.
It seems to me, and I was at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and when I first got a copy of Agenda 21, and in fact it was printed on one side of a page, and it was about that thick, about 10 pounds. And I started looking through it, and I go, this is a totalitarian agenda. It actually calls for government control, a global government program that covers all aspects of all human endeavor, all human activity. In fact, it says all human activity for every conceivable environmental sector, for the skies, for the troposphere, for the oceans and lakes and streams and rivers and ponds and fields and mountains and tundras. Everything has to come under some kind of global environmental and social control, because it went way beyond just environmental clean air and things of that nature to covering every profession, all schools, all labor, virtually everything.
Absolutely. Well, yes, their own charter is to define the role of business and industry, and that is an absolute control of the free enterprise system, or manipulation of.
Now, in Virginia, you say there are, did you say 3 entities, either cities or counties, that have dropped their membership in ICLEI?
Yes, they have.
What many people don't realize is that several thousand cities, counties, or governments around the world have become members of this group, ICLEI, which is local control, sustainability for local initiatives or something. Yeah. So anyway, what they become members, then they give public funds for membership dues, and then ICLEI uses these funds and brings together their experts who draw up master plans for their communities that cover all aspects of business and agriculture and all aspects of their lives.
That's right. Well, yes, our public funds also trickle down to other organizations, grassroots organizations. Funds have actually been given, public funds that are routed through ICLEI to the Sierra Club, which is a grassroots environmental organization. I mean,
which is already quite wealthy in its own.
Absolutely, absolutely. But they are receiving funding for working with local governments for their inventory on greenhouse gases.
And this is a very incestuous relationship that we have here, because many of these so-called green groups that have been promoting this all along since and before Rio Earth Summit have now been able to get this agenda fastened onto local governments and force the taxpayers to kick money back into the efforts of these so-called environmentalist groups.
Absolutely. Well, and there are incentives coming down to local governments and NGOs from federal agencies, and it's public funds. For example, there's an energy efficiency and conservation block grant program that provides grants to local governments to implement provisions in cap and trade. That was rejected by Congress. It's been rejected at least by our Virginia legislature.
But yet it's still federal funds are coming in and they're at the local level.
Absolutely, and it's being implemented at the local level, and it's a requirement to implement the provisions in order to receive that funding.
So this is really a subversive backdoor way of getting something through at the state or local level that Congress has already rejected at the national level, and not through legitimate grassroots organization here, but by funding that's coming from the federal government.
Absolutely. Well, and it extends through the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education. They provide grants to K through 12 public schools for sustainability programs in the school, and to colleges and universities. So for several decades now, they've been indoctrinating our children in their idea of what sustainable development is, or in the concept of social justice.
What are some of the issues that brought this to a head that caused the people in your areas to reject ICLEI?
Well, there were some residents, especially in next to waterways, who were dealing with a lot of problems from the EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And though they were getting building permits to do things like build bulkheads and piers and decks and this sort of thing. The U.S. Corps of Engineers was swooping in, and they were saying, hey, you're in violation of environmental code, and you've got to remove this, or you can be fined many, many thousands of dollars a day.
So these are private landowners that were, and farmers, or
we've had farmers dealing with
or?
the same thing. We've had farmers coming to us saying, hey, they're telling us we have to build fences within, to keep our cattle 300 feet or more from a water source. We've been used to having our cattle go and water at the nearby pond or on our own property. But they're being told they can't allow cattle within 300 feet of the water on their own property. So they no longer own the water that sits on their own property.
So the areas where the ICLEI has been rejected now, these are counties or cities? Or
they're counties. We have found that cities have been a little less receptive to our message. But we're hoping with more momentum and with the development of the Democrats against UN Agenda 21. There is a website out there, and there's a young woman from California who's been mobilizing on that. So the message is even reaching Democrats, so it's crossing the aisle. And we are reaching out and hope to have an effect. I think that because we are now bringing about the debate so widespread across the state, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to reach them. As a matter of fact, even Republican committee units have invited me to speak to them about Agenda 21 and sustainable development. Wonderful. So it has entered the Republican debate. Legislators have contacted me. Legislators are attending many of my presentations. So they're getting it, and they're reaching out and asking for more information. And even some of those real conservatives who generally vote the way we would ask them to vote, it was a little difficult for them to wrap their head around. And I think sometimes they just can't see the forest for the trees.
Well, what I found back in 1992 when I came back from Rio, and I was on a national tour about the United Nations. But when I would bring up Agenda 21, it just seemed so far out to most people, even when I was on conservative talk shows. They thought that was out in la-la land. Oh, well, yeah, that might be some kind of weird UN proposal, but nobody would ever go for that. And it's taken 20 years. Now it's become fastened on much of our political agenda across the country, and now people are seeing the real results of that, and
Absolutely.
They're starting to say, hey, something's very wrong here. Well, thank you very much, and again, I want to tell our listeners and viewers about this. This is the history of sustainable development, connecting the dots, prepared by the Virginia Campaign for Liberty. And we're so thankful to have you here, Donna Holt, President and Executive Director.
Thank you, I appreciate it.